Strong, and welcome to Green Bay. How about this new venue? Saw some photos online, looked like you all were having a really great time at Lambeau. And with the Packers still in the game, you never know who you might see here in Green Bay. Last time I was at an event here at the KI Center, I ran into Troy Aikman and Joe Buck. And I know I might hear some groaning and grumblings. It's actually a super embarrassing story. So talk about it with me during the social periods. Well, my name is Joanna Guza. I am a farm broadcaster here in Northeast Wisconsin and also the host of the Dairy Stream podcast, and I'm really excited to be your MC for today. If this is your first time at Dairy Strong, welcome. If you've been here before, welcome back. We have our usual great keynote speakers, breakout session, the innovation stage presentations that you saw this morning happening in the trade show, and also the Wisconsin Master Cheesemaker reception. And new this year is the Dairy Strong After Hours. That's going to be taking place after the evening keynote, and it includes entertainment with dueling pianos. With all these speakers, the food, the entertainment that we're going to have, it wouldn't be possible without the sponsors. So you can see a full list of the sponsors in your program. Now to get this event started, I'd like Lee Kinnard, President of the Dairy Business Association, and a laugh that you can hear throughout the trade show, join me on stage to give a brief welcome. Please help me welcome Lee.
Good morning, everybody, and welcome to Dairy Strong. Delighted to see a lot of old friends here that I haven't seen in quite some time. For a farm kid from just up the road here, this is my Christmas. I love talking farm. I love talking with farmers, and really love listening to farmers and you know what their adventures have been for the past year. And I think that's one of the things I want to encourage today. As you go around, we've got some great exhibitors. We've got some great vendors. They are making this entire event possible. So, you know, please take some time to thank them and to listen to what they have to say. A lot of them have some really good solutions for some things that we didn't even know we had problems for. So I want to tell you a little story about listening that comes from my family. Those that know me well, know I'm from a very large family. We're very close-knit. And we have a lot of good stories from over the years. The particular one that I'm about to share is from one of my older sisters. We have events several times a year where it was tradition where we would get together. Everybody would fly back in from their various homes. This particular sister was from Arizona. She and her husband flew in. We were sitting around the dinner table, and her husband was always kind of a shy guy, very nice person, but never spoke very much. When he did speak, people would listen. So as was usual, there was 15, 20 people sitting around the table and all yakking about all the life's events since we had last seen each other. And Bruce, the brother-in-law, suddenly speaks, and it falls totally silent around the table. And Bruce is an emergency room doctor, and he's got a story to share, and everybody's just like, okay, let's listen to this story. So Bruce is talking about a couple of days earlier. He's an emergency room doctor. He had been on shift, the night shift, and at bar time, 2 people were carted in and really beat up. Well, it turns out they had been into a bar fight. They had beat the living tar out of each other. And the fight only ended when one of the gentlemen literally bit the other's ear off. We're not talking a nibble. We're not talking just teeth marks. We're talking biting the entire ear off. My family at this time is just, listening in total shock as Bruce tells this story. And Bruce goes on and he says, so I'm finishing my rounds, and the next morning before I leave, I check in on the patient. And I go to the room and I said, John, how are you doing? How is things feeling? Without missing a beat, the patient puts his hands to his abdomen, which is where Bruce had reattached the ear so that it wouldn't get reinfected, and says, "What's that, doc? I can't hear you." Now you gotta understand, Bruce has never told a joke in his life. My family is rolling with laughter at this comment, and Bruce is just very much telling us what his life is about. So how does that tie into Dairy Strong? I think that ties very well into Dairy Strong in that I really encourage, I've been out in the halls talking to farmers, listening. And I think sometimes maybe even listening in a different way. I think there's a lot to be gained over the next couple of days. I'm excited to see you all here. Looking forward to talking to each of you in the halls and in the conferences. So I'd encourage you to listen, learn, and have a lot of fun. And with that, welcome and thank you for being here.
Thank you, Lee. We'll make sure we're keeping it PG here at Dairy Strong. It won't get that intense. Now, to get ready for our keynote speaker, sponsored by Nicolay National Bank, I'd like Chris Schneider, Vice President of Senior Ag Banking at Nicolay National Bank, join me on stage to introduce the opening keynote speaker. Please help me welcome Chris.
Morning. Today is my pleasure to introduce our keynote speaker, Thomas Barnett. Thomas P.M. Barnett is a leading geopolitical strategist and best-selling author who has worked in U.S. national security circles since the end of the Cold War. He is known for his work at the United States Naval War College and at the Office of Force Transformation in the Department of Defense under the direction of the late Vice Admiral Arthur K. Sembrowski, known as the father of network-centric warfare. After 9/11, Thomas joined Sembrowski's new Office of Force Transformation in the Office of the Secretary of Defense. As the Assistant for Strategic Futures, in that capacity, he developed an influential belief on globalization and international security, which later morphed into a New York Times best-selling book, The Pentagon's New Map, 2004. Thomas extended his New Map series with the volumes Blueprint for Action in 2005 and The Great Powers in 2009. Upon leaving the government service in 2005, Thomas worked for a series of technology startups exploring cognitive artificial intelligence, crowdsourcing, wargaming, and enterprise resilience. He worked for years as a journalist, both as contributing editor at the Esquire and Scripps News Syndicate columnist. Thomas was likewise a visiting strategist at the Oak Ridge National Laboratory, and later research fellow at the Beijing-based known Farr Institute for Strategic and Defense Studies. Thomas now serves as a principal business strategist at Throughline, Inc., where he is focused on scenario planning, his current work, and thinking about the converging forces of geopolitical security, climate change, technology, supply chain, and America's ability to lead are valued by Throughline clients, including the U.S. national security community, major U.S. government agencies, and multinational corporations and nonprofits. Please welcome Thomas Barnett.
Thank you very much for the introduction. All you need to know about me is I was born in Chilton, just south of here, grew up in Boscobel, in the southwest corner of the state, worked on dairy farms in the summer. My specialty was no longer needed today. I was the guy who stacked bales of hay into these giant wooden barns. You know, you'd walk in and it would be like a 30-foot tall thing. By the time you got done, you were crawling out of the top, going down the elevator. I took my kids recently to the Henry Ford Museum in Detroit, and they had a baler from back then. And I pointed it out, and they were like, you know, geez, Dad, your childhood's already in a museum. Season ticket holder since 2001. My grandfather's in the Packer Hall of Fame. He was with the Packers for 30 years. What position did he play, you may ask? He was legal counsel. I'm going to go pretty fast here. I'm going to give you the bottom line up front. My story starts with U.S.-style globalization and the three big outcomes from U.S.-style globalization. which was put in motion after the Second World War because we were tired of saving Europe's ass as we had to First and Second World Wars. Okay? All this activity unleashed by globalization has turbocharged climate change. It has also set in motion demographic transitions around the world. The planet is rapidly aging, more in the north than in the south. But the big thing is we created for the first time in history a majority global middle class. All my life I was told this was impossible, never could happen. It's happened. And now that is the big demand signal in the world. Feeding and making that global middle class happy. Because the middle class has achieved a decent life and wants to hold on to it. So you scare a middle class like we've done in America the last 10, 15 years, and you get a lot of political tumult and reaction. So we're looking at a zone of turbulence. All three of these things are playing out the next 4 or 5 decades. Climate change will have peaked around 2070, 2080. We're going to start depopulating as a species around 2070. That majority global middle class will choose its political pathway. As that pathway unfolds, there will be intense pressures for north-south integration. It's going to be harder and harder to live in lower latitudes. People are going to come north in numbers beyond our imagination. So if you think immigration and border security is an issue now, it gets a whole lot different, a whole lot bigger. There's going to be a competition among the superpowers as to who wins brand loyalty throughout that global south. And it's not just, do you like our political system or not? It really comes down to, first and foremost, do you like my smartphone? Because if you like my smartphone, now I have access to everything you do in your life. And I can control your ecosystem. I can control the way you think. So there's an intense effort here to create brand loyalties to about 2 billion souls who are coming online in terms of consumption next 10 to 15 to 20 years. They go from unprocessed, unpackaged, unbranded goods to processed, packaged, branded goods. And we know that when you win a consumer early in their life, just like the first presidential vote or the first car you buy, you tend to stick with that choice throughout your life. So much is at stake here. I'm going to tell you America should focus on the Western Hemisphere in this competition for a variety of reasons. I am clearly a 30,000-foot view guy. If I can get the slide back up. I deal in very big things, inevitabilities I call them. So I'm going to introduce these inevitabilities, and then I'm going to try to get you to think about some of the things that may seem inconceivable from today's perspective, but frankly, we're going to end up doing. Not because it's cool or visionary, but because it's going to hurt too damn much if we don't. But I like to emphasize, I got 6 hostages of fortune here. These are my kids. They're going to live and see all of this. They're going to experience all of this. When I talk 2050, 2060, 2070, they're going to be there. So this is not an abstraction for me. This is what we leave behind for our kids. That's why I focus on a happy ending. A lot of people who do this kind of work, strictly doom and gloom, scare the hell out of you. It's good for celebrity. It's good for TV appearances. It's good for book sales. It's absolutely wrong, though. It just deadens people's attention. It deadens their ambitions to tell them everything's going to hell in a handbasket, because it's not. We have all the technology and all the wherewithal to get through the next few decades. It's just going to require evolution at a speed we haven't done in quite some time. So let's talk about these 6 points I'm going to lay out. The first has to do with U.S.-style globalization, what we created after the Second World War, spread around the planet, hugely successful. Now we look at it as Frankenstein's monster unleashed. We no longer control globalization like we used to. It controls us more. And that scares the hell out of us. Here's my favorite map. States of America compared to countries with the same GDP. California, size of the Indian GDP. India has 36 times more people. Here's the rest of the map. If you added up everybody on this map, I'm talking 2.2 billion souls. So how did we create a system where 330 million people could make all that economic activity happen. It's because we created the most free trade regime in the world inside our federal union. Absolute free movement of people, money, goods, ideas, services, everything. That's the rule set we took and tried to impose upon the world after the Second World War, and we were inordinately successful. So I'm telling you, we're the world's oldest and most successful multinational republic. The EU did not invent this. We did. We got a single currency in 1862 thanks to Abraham Lincoln. We are, in effect, globalization in miniature. We're the parents of globalization. We're the avatar of globalization going into the future. And let us not forget, at the height of our power, in the middle of the 20th century, we set in motion the development of a global middle class, the greatest achievement any country in human history. But it does create a more competitive landscape. Okay? And we got to live with that. We created a system where there's no ruler, but lots of rules. Where you can rise and get rich as a country, even if you don't have a big military. We created a system where multiple powers could rise and maintain their status. And now that we have it, we're freaking out, and we're really nostalgic for the unipolar days of the early 1990s when it was just us and the rest of them. Now the rest of them are pretty big, and we have to compete. And that's difficult, because frankly, we've been in charge of this system for decades. Let's talk climate change. It takes what is an east-west world in terms of dynamics and turns it into a north-south world in terms of dynamics. There's no question we've altered the planet. We put 1 trillion tons of carbon into the atmosphere. 1 trillion tons is equal to the weight of every single building on this planet today. That's how much carbon we shoved into the atmosphere. We've formatted 3/4 of the land in the world. We've acidified and raised the temperature of the world's oceans. We have triggered the 6th great mass extinction in human history. Scientists tell us the average species has to adapt at roughly 10,000 times the normal evolutionary speed. And most of them are going to fail. We're not, because we have the technology. But this is a sense of how much we've impacted the planet, so much so that scientists talk about a new geological age, the Anthropocene, the human epoch. We now control the planet. We have created a situation where the lower latitudes are going to suffer dramatically. Half the world's population, the bulk of future global south middle class consumption, sits below 30 degrees north and above 30 degrees south. I call it Middle Earth. Half the world's population, most of the growth in the global economy going forward, they're going to experience on a regular basis what we got a glimpse of last summer. Temperature ranges, precipitation ranges, akin to today's Sahara Desert. Check out your maps in the world. You will see that hardly anybody lives in the Saharan Desert because it's just too hard. So that's going to put people on the move. And we know where they're going because we've been tracking species for decades now, and they're all heading towards the poles. They're all heading up in elevation. The whole world is moving, and we're going to move with it. That's because you're going to see roughly 2 Australias worth of arable, livable land in Middle Earth, 2 Australias worth, roughly 10% of the world's land mass, disappear in terms of usability. So people are going to abandon it. We're going to see places that you're going to visit as tourists. You're going to say, what happened here? Well, people used to live here before climate change. They don't anymore. Now it's ecotourism of the dark sort. What's also going to happen, though, magically, is roughly 2 Australias worth, roughly 15,000 square kilometers of new arable, livable land is going to appear across the global north. A lot of it around the Arctic Circle. So you got all these people put on the move, you got land disappearing, you got land appearing, and there's no mystery. People are going to head toward the land. So here's the problem set. All this risk and need defining Middle Earth or the global South. We look at it in terms of cost, we got the power. The goal is to keep a limited impact, boost resilience of people living in the Middle Earth. We can send them economic aid. We could try to make foreign direct investment go down there, but foreign direct investment goes where it feels good and safe and optimistic about the future. And there's no reason to feel good and safe and optimistic about that future. Governments are going to survive and hopefully keep as much of the population down there as possible, or they're going to fail. When they do fail, we're going to perceive them sometimes as threats, and we're going to have military responses. A lot of people are going to leave. They go from the rural to the city, then they can't make it in the city, they go a country over, can't make it there, they give up, they go 1,000 miles north on foot to the U.S. Rio Grande. So we're looking at the potential of maybe 1 billion people moving from Middle Earth to the northern quartile of the planet over this century. When they come, the question becomes political in terms of response. Do we repel, build that wall, or do we resettle? It's already come down to mass loss of life. The Saudis killed about 1,000 Ethiopian climate migrants coming over the border from Yemen, just gunned them down. Italian Coast Guard let a ship of about 1,000 souls go down in the Mediterranean. So this is already happening. More people die trying to cross our southern border every year than died trying to get from East Berlin to West Berlin when the wall was up for 30 years. We lose that many on the Rio Grande every year. So this becomes a life and death situation that we're already encountering. My argument in the book is that we need some sort of bigger response. We need to offer them, these countries throughout Middle Earth, access to larger political, economic, security unions. We need to socialize the hemispheric risk in order to attract foreign direct investment down there, to keep a population in place as much as possible, and probably keep foreign powers from coming into our neck of the woods, like the Chinese are doing throughout Latin America. So either we socialize the risk, or it comes in our direction, big time. And I'm talking climate shifting, which you can't stop with a 30-foot wall. Now let's talk demographics. We got all this push making us go in this direction. Demographics feeds this disparity between North and South because it's a balancing act. I'm going to explain what a demographic dividend is. It's a stage of development you go through in terms of your procreation in a society. A pre-modern society has a high birth, high death rate. Modern society has a low birth, low death rate. How you get from above to below is called the demographic transition. How this happens: you start to see people move from the rural to the urban. They get better medical care. Babies start making it to age 5 in much higher percentages. So people start having fewer babies over time. But it takes a while. They tend to procreate at the rural rate for an entire generation before switching over to the urban rate. I know, I was 8th of 9 kids in my family. Okay? So we went through that whole process. When that lag kicks in, you get a natural increase, a single generation that's inordinately large. In America, we called it the baby boom after the Second World War. Everybody likes babies. Problem is they grow into teenagers and then they freak you out. You're worried about crime, you're worried about revolution. You got the 1960s. Then they turn into lots of workers relative to dependents. That was China the last 30 years. But guess what? Eventually, you start stockpiling old people. They call that the silver tsunami. So here's what it looks like. We call these things age pyramids because normally they look like this. okay? This is South Korea, 1950, baby boom. 25 years later, you could see that bulge start to go through. This is when they took off economically. And this is where they're heading. Completely unnatural. Packs of wolves should hunt these people down in large numbers and thin the herd. But we're beyond that. We're above nature. We control nature more than it controls us now. So here's my history of globalization. It's not who's got the coolest model in the world. It's who's got the demographic dividend. We had it after the Second World War. Then Japan had a 3-decade demographic boom. And they were going to run the world forever until they got old really fast. And then the Chinese came along with an even bigger boom. But you've seen all the headlines. China's starting to depopulate. Now the center of gravity is Southeast Asia. It moves very quickly to India. You're going to see these headlines more and more and more. The Hindu miracle, it's a demographic dividend. It's going to shift ultimately to Africa. There's your history of globalization. It's all about demographics. That's how you march your way to the top, and it's happened time and again. Now let's talk about the superpower brand wars and the fight over this global middle class. 5 major players involved in this. The Russians still matter because they control so much land in the north, and they still got nukes. The Chinese, huge player in the global economy. Indians coming up. Europe, its own huge manufacturing demand hub, and then, of course, us. As a thought experiment, having gone through this recently with Aaron Rodgers leaving, I say imagine global free agency, just like in sports, but for geopolitics. You've got a free agency. You're Norway, you can sign with whoever you want. You're Oregon, you can leave and sign with Canada if you want. You can go to a new franchise, start your career over. Imagine that could happen in the world. And these are the 5 major players who all throw down their borders one day and say, open for business, who wants to sign? My question, which brands would get huge and which brands might even disappear? That's the attraction we have in this world. It's not our military power. We don't have enough money anymore to control things. What we have is the American dream and how it attracts people from all over the world. That's our power going forward. That's how we win brand loyalty throughout that global middle class. And that's how we deal with climate change. The EU has a model, state accession. So I talked about, let's open up the American Union, have new members. I mean, we could build a military base in Guyana tomorrow to protect them from the Venezuelans because they got all that oil. Or we could make Guyana the 51st state. You'll say impossible. Well, look at the European Union and what they've done since creating the Union in 1957. They've been adding members. 1 loss, 10 in the pipeline. So there is a model out there for political accession. You don't do it to make money in the short term. You do it to bulk up your heft over time because you're going up against the Indians and the Chinese with 1 billion consumers each. Plus, you're dealing with security problems. Do you want to fight Putin in Kiev or do you want to fight him in Berlin? Well, they made the decision. I would have the same attitude towards our border issues. Would I rather have the border at the Rio Grande or say at the bottom of Mexico or maybe at the Darien Gap? The Russians got a model for integration. It's called conquer little countries on their borders. They've been doing that like crazy lately. It's a brutal model. But they're doing that primarily because the countries they target want to leave and sign with the EU as free agents. So what I'm talking about, that thought experiment's happening. It's happening to such a degree, wars are resulting. Then you got the Chinese model, economic integration. They come in, cement your connectivity, literally, to the global economy. But it's not just that. They want to operate your 5G networks. They want to bring in their surveillance technology, smart city, safe city. Pretty soon they control that cell phone. They have access to all your information. That's how you build artificial intelligence. Massive amounts of big data. So if they get to the global south and they get the global south all signed up, they know exactly what they want. And they will push it, just like Amazon pushes it. And then they'll start owning their information ecosystem. Then they'll start shaping their values. And we'll see the whole thing, coot and caboodle, just go to the Chinese and fall out of our orbit in terms of access. Not just ideological access, I'm talking consumer access. These are all the countries in the world where the Chinese have sold their security technology. And then, of course, we got to remember that the key relationship here is not between the United States and China, it's between China and India. What do I mean by that? China and India are half the world's growth right now. China's share is going down. India's share is going up. India just replaced China as the biggest exporter of goods to Walmart. That is a key indicator. In this world, power is not determined by supply. It's determined by demand. Okay? The Chinese shape markets all over the world because of what they want. If they want a little bit more dairy or a few more pecans, it alters the markets around the world. We also got to understand that we look at the world very differently than the Chinese or the Russians. We tend to play poker. The Russians play chess. The Chinese play Go. We are always looking for a showdown. Putin, I'll raise you F-16s. Are you going to take that bet? Are you going to call? Are you going to hold? What are you going to do? That's the way we look at the world. We play players. The Chinese play the board. They put down their Go stones all over the world, building their networks. Very different outlook. Now I'm going to tell you why we're going to win this competition. If this future is all about the stress that's going to be put on the world in terms of demographics, in terms of climate change, in terms of north-south integration, in terms of winning the global middle class, I'm going to tell you the Western Hemisphere is incredibly better off than either Asia or the Europe-Africa slice in the middle. So let's look at those three vertical slices. Western Hemisphere on the left, Europe, Middle East, Africa in the middle, and we got Asia on the right. We have a long history of interstate peace in our neck of the woods. Not even close. Our military power is bigger than the next 10 powers in the world. Not even close. In terms of resource advantages, we have about 15% of the world's population and about 45% of the world's freshwater resources. You got extra water per person, guess what? You're going to have extra food per person. So there's what you grow, there's what you eat, there's what you import, and there's what's left over to export. When you look at it that way, the Western Hemisphere controls about 80% of the caloric flow of foods around the planet. The West feeds the rest. And then we're also very well situated in terms of energy and even renewable energy minerals, lithium. We just found that huge find right off, I think, Las Vegas. So we are well situated along all sorts of measures. We're also ripe for trade integration in the Western Hemisphere. There are three major trade, manufacturing, demand hubs in the world: Europe, East Asia, North America. Europe already has trade integration to the tune of 70%. They really work it. Already, East Asia at 50%. 3 decades of NAFTA, and we're still stuck at just 40%. And our trade integration with Latin America is in the teens. We see Latin America as a source of two things: drugs and illegal immigrants. And we are shooting ourselves in the foot with that attitude, because the Chinese are moving in throughout. And if we're not careful, they're going to have all those resources, all that middle class, and they're going to be doing security on the southern side of the Rio Grande. In terms of complexity, I'd like to point out, we are the New World. We were invaded by Europeans, bringing Africans as enslaved, letting in cheap Asian labor. We decimated the American Indian population. And then for the last 500 years, we've been intermarrying, which means we are the most mixed race part of the world there is. And already throughout the Western Hemisphere, whites are in the majority, minority at 45%. Why do I bring that up? America's going through a transition right now. Across my lifetime, from peak whiteness, 1950, 90% white, to roughly 45% white, 2050. And I will tell you, the political polarization in this country largely stems from that journey, spoken or unspoken. That's what's freaking a lot of people out. And it's not just people in America feeling freaked out about how globalization is changing us. It's also a sense about how we're no longer the great driver of globalization. So it's a double whammy. We feel displaced internally, we feel displaced externally. And so we reach for more radical answers. In terms of social complexity, 4 languages get you 99% of the Western Hemisphere. The Eastern Hemisphere has hundreds of languages, hundreds. We are also stunningly uniform in terms of religiosity. 80% Christian in the Western Hemisphere. Half the world's Catholics live here. 3 biggest Catholic countries, Mexico, Brazil, United States. There's a reason why 7 of the 9 Supreme Court justices are Catholic. And then when we think about moving towards the north, we have the Canadians to deal with. The rest have the Russians. We totally luck out. In terms of demographic disparities, much easier for us to integrate. The age differences are less profound, but they help us tremendously because they keep our average age worker in the 30s. So all the people who come from around the world, the immigrants, basically keep us in a demographic dividend permanently. If you added up all the Latinos in America, it'd be the 5th largest economy in the world. In terms of north-south match on political freedom, the Western Hemisphere is amazingly uniform in terms of more political pluralism compared to the other 2 slices. In terms of superpowers, Europe's have to deal with the Russians. The Chinese have to deal with rising India. We got nobody we have to deal with in the Western Hemisphere. And then finally, we're the most admired national brand in the world. Even as we denigrate it now and trash it every chance we get, we are the biggest attractor on the planet. So let me wrap this up. In America's first strategy, I'm going to make this argument by process of elimination. Do you think we're going to out-integrate the Chinese in Asia? I don't think so. I don't think we're in charge of that process anymore. Do you think we're going to out-integrate the EU in Europe? No, I think they're all grown up. I think they're a true geopolitical union. They're going to have their own military probably in 10 years. The whole Russia-Ukraine thing has totally galvanized them. Do you think we're going back to the Middle East in a big way like we did before? We'll fire missiles at the Houthis all night and day, but no. Do you think we're going to out-integrate all the players coming to Africa over the next 10 to 15 to 20 years? In 2050, 1 out of 4 humans is going to be living in Africa, and they're mostly going to be young. But we're not going to make that integration happen. That's not where we are economically. So I'm arguing if we can't out-integrate the rest of the world in the Western Hemisphere, where else do you think it's going to happen? And if we don't make that effort, we're going to be the United States of America, and everything else is going to be run by somebody else. And over time, that's going to be limited access to that global majority middle class. And if you want to get old fast and you want to get poor fast, you build walls. Flags, countries, either grow or wither. You know, when your brand gets really old, they take you off the supermarket shelf. Frankly, when your country gets really old, you tend to get removed from maps. Throughout history, Soviet Union was very real. I was going to have a career as a Soviet expert till it fell apart right as I was getting my PhD in 1990. Oops. So the Soviet Union was a real country until one day it stopped being real in the minds of its citizens, and then it disappeared. And that can happen in this country as well. Historically, our answer has always been, through 7 generations of Barnetts, get bigger, get better. Whatever our problem set was, we were open for business. We wanted new members. We wanted to grow. We would buy them. We would conquer them. We'd do whatever it took. We brought in monarchies, Hawaii. We'd purchase land on the sly from the Russians, otherwise known as Alaska. Mexico's already given us about 15 states. Could give us another 10. My point is, we are not going to go through this zone of turbulence looking the same way as we are now. We're either going to get bigger, play bigger, act bigger, or we're going to get dramatically smaller. And that's going to impact your industry incredibly, because it's all about who has access to that global middle class. And that is a brand loyalty issue. We've seen a middle class arise in the West at the beginning of the 20th century. We got fascism, Nazism, Bolshevism, communism as 2 radical responses from right and left. We're going to get the same responses now. In fact, the Democrats and Republicans call each other the same names now. Republicans are all fascists, Democrats are all communists. Okay? We don't even change the titles, even though the circumstances change dramatically. These are the kinds of choices we need to consider. These are the inconceivables we need to wrap our minds around. I don't want the United States to be smaller and less important over time. I also want to give young people in this country a sense of purpose. And they're not going to buy into a 60-year Cold War with the Chinese. That's a boomer thing. They're not going to shoot them at the Rio Grande. That's not what they're going to sign up for. They're not going to join that military. They're not going to be part of that union. You need to give them something bigger, something more exciting, something they can build. I'll be happy to take questions. Stunned silence. You want to ask me about my seats? Section 342, seat 11, rows 1 and 2. That's how I got my seats. I called up when they expanded the upper bowl, and I said, do you have any front to backs anywhere in the stadium? They said, yeah, we have 1 pair. And I said, mine. Go for gusto.
I have a question for you. First of all, that was fascinating. It definitely captured my attention. My name's Holly Bellman. I live here in Green Bay. We watch a lot of football here, as you do too. We also watch college football. Bear with me. SEC going crazy right now with change and transformation. Big Ten going crazy with change and transformation. We can hardly wrap our minds around that. How are we going to wrap our minds around this, and how is this going to be introduced to the American public in a way that people can have a dialogue about this outside of the think tanks?
I give a lot of speeches. It's a tough road to hoe, I'll tell you. When I had my story about the world after 9/11, invitations poured in because everybody wanted to figure out the world after 9/11. But now everybody wants to figure out whether America's going to have a civil war or not, or whether Trump's going to destroy democracy. This is the big subject. Nobody wants to talk about this, even though when you talk to millennials and Gen Zs, that's all they want to talk about. The culture war stuff interests them almost nada. No interest in that. They've grown up in a world that is majority, minority white. They've grown up in a world that's incredibly diverse. They've grown up in a world where all these gender and sexual orientation things, they're just taken for granted. They don't argue them at all. I got 2 millennials, 4 Gen Zs. You know how many times they stop me mid-sentence? No, Dad, no. We don't say that. We don't think that. We don't act like that. You know how humiliating it is to be told that all the time? How out of touch you are with the way things are? Okay? Well, that's what the problem set is. The mean age for whites in America is 58. The mean age for non-whites, the most common age for non-whites, is 27. Okay, you saw that first Republican GOP debate. First question, they said, young millennial, ask us about the future. Millennial said, climate change, what do you got? They all looked at their shoes, and Ramaswamy yelled out, hoax! And that was the answer. That's how much they wanted to hear about climate change. Okay? It is hard because the boomers know what they know. The boomers still control Congress. The boomers grew up in the Cold War, and they know how to deal with everything. It's called Cold War, it's called containment, it's called military interventions. That's how they deal with stuff. So we're all jacked now about the Russians in Ukraine. We're all jacked now about Israel and Gaza. We're jacked about the possibility of Taiwan. These are problem sets that have been around for 5, 6, 7 decades. They're nothing new. And yet our political leadership wants it to seem like the whole world is in conflict, and we need to have all this focus on political military. When we all lived through the summer from hell last year, that was stunning. That was just a glimpse of 1.5 above pre-industrial. And we're looking to live that more and more each year. Now, if you're 59, 60, I might get this response all the time. I get it in book reviews. I'm 69. I don't know what the hell this guy's talking about. I'm not going to be around anyway. Why do I care? Well, you care if you have kids, because they are going to be stuck in this world. So it is, unfortunately, a generational turnover. I say vote early, vote often, vote young. Don't vote for anybody over 45 if you can help it, because they're just a complete waste of time. I know that sounds harsh, but I think history's going to look back and say the boomers were the worst political generation of leadership that we've ever had. They're the first country that took a big country and made it smaller. Every other generation in American history, we got bigger, better, more powerful. We added new members. Okay? Every generation of Barnetts gets new stars, except for this guy. I got nothing. 61 years and counting. I'll be the first Barnett to die under the same flag I was born under. Barack Obama will be the first president to suffer that fate. We need to give him something bigger and better to think about. And it's hard to bust through the din right now because we're going through this racial makeover, which has us absolutely freaked out politically. Absolutely freaked out. I think there's probably 10 or 15 more years of that, to include a substantial amount of political violence inside the country. And then the boomers are going to just age out. Thank God. It's a depressing answer, I know.
So, a question from a boomer.
I'm just talking about political boomers. The real talent went
I'm
into
a-
business
I'm
and
a
technology.
boomer, and I can compete with you in longevity in your relationship with the Packers, so we can talk later. What I didn't see in your presentation was the impact of the global financial markets, the interconnectedness between all those geographic places
Sure.
you cited, and the role of the multinational institutions. Comment.
Yeah, I mean, all that stuff's absolutely huge. It's the reason why any sort of conflict, for example, with China, I mean, Bloomberg recently came out and said they thought it would cost $10 trillion in the first year. We spent about $8 trillion on the global war on terror over 20 years. This would be that in about 365 days, they estimate. We don't think along those lines nearly enough, the financial interconnectivity throughout our system. The fact that the Chinese hold massive amounts of our sovereign debt. And if the Chinese wanted to torpedo our economy, they could. Of course, they torpedo their own in the same time frame. But we have kind of a mutual assured destruction reality, not just in the nuclear realm, we have it throughout the financial realm. So it is enormous. I don't argue it because I don't see a whole lot of change in the system. I focus on the demographics because that's where the foreign direct investment goes. And that's the driver in the system. The Chinese have been the savers for the last 3 decades. The Chinese are now in charge of integrating the next great sources of cheap labor, Southeast Asia, India. I'm going to go speak in India in a couple of weeks, and my message to them is, you're on the upswing now. The money's starting to pour in, just like it did with the Chinese in terms of foreign direct investment. Don't just plan for when you peak. Plan to become not just a market player, but a market shaper over time, because you have to start exhibiting more responsibility for the system. That's what we keep expecting the Chinese to do, but as they do it, we have a tendency to demonize anything they do as an affront to us. Okay? So we have a tendency to view any competition as an existential threat, even though we spent the last 5, 6, 7 decades trying to build a multipolar system. And frankly, China has risen peacefully. How many wars for China in the last 4 or 5 decades? Actually, 0. How many wars for the United States? Well, we kind of go where we want and do what we want. And we set a rule set up that basically tells superpowers like China, like Iran, like Israel, if you got nukes, you can do whatever you want because nobody's going to touch you. And that's a problem. Our model of behavior the last 4 or 5 decades is a big threat to international financial markets. Please, next. We're done.
The question I have, I guess, I didn't see in your America First plan is AI. I guess I'd like your comments on where you think AI is going to push this thing going forward.
Yeah, to me that's all about accessing the middle class. And it's all about network, what I call network centrality. You want to be the center of networks. I mean, why Amazon is so powerful, why Google is so powerful is they have so much data. And AI, at this point, we're nowhere near conscious computers. That's complete fantasy for probably 5, 6 decades. What we do have now are amazing predictive engines where you could take massive amounts of data and then fill in the blank spots with highly accurate predictions. And we see this all the time on Google. You know, you did this, now we think you want to buy that. You know, so everywhere you go, it's like, get a dog collar, get a dog collar, get a pooper scooper for your dog, whatever it is. You take a look at something and then they're predicting and throwing at you and trying to anticipate. Well, imagine doing that for a global middle class. A couple billion people coming online with consumption. Not just getting by, but consumption. And who gets access to them? It's all about who owns their smartphone, who owns the networks, okay? Who then brings in the retailers connected to those phones and networks? And there's a reason why Google would love to sell you a phone. They'd like to capture you completely. Well, the Chinese are backing their flagship companies, Huawei, Hikvision, these big ones, backing them full tilt. Meanwhile, we're trying to take ours apart, which I think is a mistake. Because I see wins like, I think it was El Salvador recently, signed an agreement with Amazon, for Amazon Web Services to run El Salvador's web services, and its cloud and everything else, for like the next 8 years. I look at that and I say, that's an American win. Because if it's not us, it's Huawei. And then Huawei comes in with their Safe City, Smart City, and pretty soon they're tracking everything you do on your phone. And in China, when they do that, they punish you if you do bad things. They just take your like score and they go click, click, click. Pretty soon you find, hey, you know, I can't get a hotel room in this city. I can't get an apartment in this complex because you're not behaving well. If you want the clicks to go up, do nice things that we notice, and then we'll make you more free. That's an attempt over time to basically get you to police yourself. Okay? We look at that, Facebook, likes, dislikes, all that kind of stuff. We worry about what it does to our children. Well, imagine if you could get that on a grand scale globally. That is control. That gets you access to so much information, so much big data. That makes your AI capabilities grow faster. It's a self-licking ice cream cone. It just gets better and better. Okay, so when I say, hey, we got to care about the global middle class, we got to get open, we got to be about accepting new members and all this other stuff, that's because that's where we can beat the Chinese. Nobody wants to join China. Nobody wants to become Chinese. Everybody wants to become an American. Okay? We don't weaponize that attraction. And it's going to be a key driver for our economic access to the world. That's going to drive our access to big data. That's going to drive our access to consumption. That's going to make us economically strong. That's going to keep us a military power. All these things matter. They're all interconnected. I think I'm done.
Ms. Barnett. Thank you, and thank you to Nicolay National Bank for the presentation. Thomas Barnett will be giving another presentation in one of the breakout sessions later this morning. Then he will be available for a book signing in the exhibition hall, also the trade show from 1:15 to 1:45 today. Special thanks again to our keynote speaker and sponsor, Nicolay National Bank. The Dairy Business Association is taking really good care of you. Next on our agenda is the track shows. So just for the new venue, one track session is going to be upstairs in the grand ballrooms right when you came up the stairs, and the other two breakout sessions are going to be downstairs near registration. So the first round of breakout sessions start promptly at 10:10, so you have 4 minutes to get to your destination. We'll see you back here at dinner. Thank you.